God bless everybody today. Today is January 11th of 2022. There's a lot accelerating out here right now in the Middle East. This update is mainly pertaining to Turkey and how they are expanding into Syria and Iraq, and potentially there's an invasion that's going to occur in the near future, and how this will accelerate potentially Daniel 8, which is that the Kurds are going to be placed in an extremely precarious position. They're going to start to be shifted down through Iraq and Syria, and that they are going to then be pooled, as Daniel 8 tells us. Daniel 8, 1 through 10 especially, tells us that the Kurds or the Medes will be placed in a position where they will have to align with Persia or Iran, and that once I've shown you in my other videos that once this group of Kurds gets placed or shifted down to the area around Baghdad and in between Shush, Iran, that Turkey would crush them and destroy both these nations, and this would geopolitically change the whole world in general. Now I'm going to play this video because I think it gives content and depth to this conversation about how the Kurds are being shifted down into this area of Baghdad around Shush, Iran, and that once this occurs, we will see this destruction of both Iran and the Kurds, as Daniel 8, 1 through 10 tells us, and that from that destruction, we would then see 10 nations form, and this would take us from Daniel 8 into Ezekiel 38, 39, prior to the attack of Israel in 2023, based on my timeline, which I will show you at the end of the video. But let's watch this video. I think it's extremely important that you educate yourself on the Kurds, and that they are under extreme duress and genocide by Turkey, and that this, I believe, is a key to understanding the next event in prophecy that will occur in the future that will lead us to the rise of Antichrist once we see this destruction of Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39 occur, once they have attacked Israel and are decimated on the sixth seal by the wrath of the Lamb, or Jesus himself. So let's watch this video, and I believe this will explain a lot of the situation over there, and then I'm going to take you to the timeline and show you where I found some interesting information that I think wraps around a specific time as we move into the fall of this year.
For decades, Turkey has fought the PKK, a Kurdish separatist movement that's been designated a terror organization by the U.S. and other nations. The rebel group has sought refuge in northern Iraq, home to a significant Kurdish population. Over the years, Turkey has crossed into northern Iraq to fight the PKK, and more recently the Turks have established dozens of military bases on Iraqi soil. PBS NewsHour special correspondent Simona Foltin gained exclusive access to Turkish-controlled parts of northern Iraq.
Behind this mountain in Iraq's northern semi-autonomous Kurdish region lies what authorities here call a red zone, a restricted area where Iraq's northern neighbor Turkey has been ramping up its military presence. Driving up the mountain road, we reach the last checkpoint of the Iraqi border guard. The commander here isn't allowed to speak on camera, but tells us 12 new Turkish military bases have been set up here over the past year, well inside Iraq's borders. Beyond this point, he says, Turkish forces hold de facto control over Iraqi territory. We're around 8 miles away from Iraq's border with Turkey, and this is essentially a militarized zone where Turkey has been building a growing number of bases and outposts, and we can actually see some of them on those mountaintops behind me. For decades, Turkey has carried out sporadic operations against the PKK, an outlawed Kurdish separatist movement considered a terror group by both the US and the European Union. The PKK aims to establish a Kurdish state across Kurdish-majority parts of Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran, and it has long used these mountains as a base for its insurgency against the Turkish government. But the recent major expansion of Turkish military bases has raised fears of occupation. Down below the Turkish outposts, we find valleys emptied of civilians. Turkish operations have uprooted thousands of people in this area. Ali Mahmoud is one of few shepherds who've stayed behind to look after their livestock.
This is a military area now. We cannot go everywhere with our sheep. Many ways have been closed off.
During our 2-day visit, we heard several rounds of artillery being fired in the distance. One such strike hit Mahmoud's house in May, killing dozens of his animals and injuring 2 shepherds. He recorded this video the morning after. In just this area, 24 out of 26 villages have been emptied over the last couple of years. Mahmoud was forced to leave his village of Sharanish a few miles further north.
This is an encroachment on our lands. I had to relocate here temporarily. We hope we can go back to our village.
It's not safe for us to access the village, but detailed satellite imagery reveals the extent to which Turkey controls the area. This is the Turkish outpost we saw on our way, overlooking the road leading towards Sharanish. Perched atop the mountain to the north is another Turkish base. There are also 2 roadblocks, one before and one after Sharanish. The village itself, filmed here in 2019, has been damaged in Turkish strikes. Sharanish is completely deserted, this civilian says as he walks through its abandoned streets. The man who filmed the video fled to a nearby town and wanted to remain anonymous for fear of retribution. He told the NewsHour that Turkish forces haven't allowed anyone to go back.
We went to check on our houses, but they had blocked off the road, and when we approached, they fired warning shots.
Turkey has established around 40 military fixed points like this one across northern Iraq, with thousands of Turkish soldiers believed to operate on Iraqi soil. Iraq's federal government has criticized these maneuvers as illegal and has repeatedly summoned Turkish diplomats in the capital, Baghdad.
Nationalist group.
Ali Reza Ghuni is Turkey's ambassador to Iraq.
We're going to continue till we believe that PKK is no more threat to Turkey.
Yet the Iraqi government has condemned your presence in the north as a violation of its sovereignty.
They can do, but they first have to do their own job. Each and every country has the right to be sovereign, but it requires also being responsible to keep your territories clean out of terrorists.
But Turkey isn't alone here. The armed forces of Iraq's Kurdish region, the Peshmerga, are building bases too, and while authorities in Baghdad publicly criticize Turkey's military incursions, the ruling party of Iraqi Kurdistan, constantly in dispute with the Baghdad government, has close economic relations with Turkey and has increasingly cooperated with the Turks in their fight against the PKK. Peshmerga commander Yassin Sharwani has come to inspect the new base. It's one of dozens built in this area to pressure the PKK to take its fight back to Turkey.
The PKK cannot be active here because it's not their area. Their area is in Turkey, but until now they haven't managed to control any villages there.
And while the PKK's aim is that greater Kurdish state, Sharwani says Iraq's Kurds have what they want.
We in Iraqi Kurdistan already have autonomy, and we have no problems. We have our own government.
But Kurdish authorities are also wary of igniting fresh tensions among the Kurds, who fought brutal wars among themselves. Although the PKK sometimes attacks them, many Peshmerga are not willing to fight their own brethren. Maruf Hala Ismail has been a Peshmerga fighter for 31 years.
I swear, if there's another fight between the Kurds, I will leave my weapon and go home.
I ask him if Turkey can defeat the PKK in this mountainous terrain.
They're trying to put pressure on them using drones. In my opinion, this has no impact on them. They are moving from this mountain to that one.
To see this new military strategy in action, we visited the Kandil Mountains, the PKK's bastion in Iraqi Kurdistan. To do so, we needed the PKK's approval and were accompanied by one of its members. Many civilians have fled the conflict, and those who've stayed behind, like Renaz Zagros, are ardent PKK supporters who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the cause.
Life is really difficult. Every day there are drones and bombings.
During the interview, a Turkish drone hovers above the shop. Turkey has denied targeting civilians and has instead accused the PKK of using them as human shields. The nearly constant surveillance has forced the PKK's leadership into hiding. Its spokesperson was unable to meet for an interview. But we are able to get the PKK's perspective in the Mahmur refugee camp, 100 miles southwest of the Kandil Mountains. It was set up 23 years ago for Turkish Kurds uprooted by the Turkey-PKK conflict. The Turkish government has called the camp an incubator for militants and has repeatedly targeted it with airstrikes, killing both PKK fighters and civilians. Leyla Arzu Ilhan is part of the camp management, comprised of PKK loyalists.
For sure we are afraid. Every 3 to 4 days there is a Turkish drone flying above and watching us, but it doesn't mean we will stop. We are revolting against Turkey's occupation.
Ilhan believes Turkey is using the PKK as a pretext for territorial expansion.
They are trying to return to the times of the Ottoman Empire. They are trying to enlarge their territory at the expense of minorities.
Iraqi officials say what's really needed is a political solution to end this decades-long conflict. But with none on the horizon, Turkey's fight against the PKK in Iraq has opened the door to long-term Turkish military presence and perhaps wider conflict for an already destabilized region. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Simona Foltin in northern Iraq.
So, as Turkey is starting to prepare to invade, do a massive invasion into Iraq and Syria in the next possible days, weeks, or months as we move forward. I think it'll be potentially weeks or in the next month or so. One of the problems Erdogan's running into is that his inflation in his country has soared to 36%. This is the highest recorded inflation in Erdogan's 20 years as being a president or leader of this country. And so this is a real problem for him. He needs to basically find a way out of this calamity. And the only way through this calamity, usually through economic destruction, is through war. And so I believe that is one of the main causes of Erdogan's invasion that's coming up, and that it's ordained by God to happen, and that through this would then apply more pressure to the Kurds, and that they would be forced down into that area around Baghdad and Shush, Iran. And when that occurs, we would see an alignment of the Medes, or the Kurdish people, with Persia or Iran. And as Daniel 8, 1 through 10 tells us, once this occurs, we would see the destruction of both the Kurds and Iran. And from this destruction, we would see Iran absorbed into the new Ottoman Empire that Erdogan wants to rebuild by 2023. So I mainly wanted to update you on this, show you that Erdogan is in the process of playing out really desperate moves to try to save his economy, and this is going to bring us to a extremely harsh point in the next year. I say potentially in September of this year coming up, we're going to see a lot of destruction, and potentially the destruction of a country called Iran. So if you go to my eschatology site at endofdaysurvival.com and you go down to this PDF file, the center PDF file, and click on that, this is that timeline or flow chart that links Daniel 8, 12, and most of them, if not all of the major prophets together into a timeline that gives you a optic into what's happening in the next 6 years. So let's go look at that real quick. So I've just updated this timeline flow chart, and most of the new changes fall in this area because I found something I thought was fairly profound and thought I should bring it to your attention. So if you go and you blow up into this area, so as I was looking at my timeline the other day, I saw something that caught my eye and I thought was extremely important and wanted to bring it to your attention. So I just want to walk through this little portion of the timeline just so you understand where I'm coming from here. So we had the Feast of Trumpets last year on a sabbatical Saturday, and they blew the shofar, which I thought was a warning to Israel and Judah that this would unleash the king of the north, or Turkey, against them, as indicated in Jeremiah 4, 5 through 9. And that, as we move forward, we would see Daniel 8 start to transpire, and the destruction of Iran would occur within a year or so. But I realized something the other day that I thought was extremely important. So we had on September 7th of 2021, the start of the sabbatical year, the start of the new Shemitah cycle, the 7-year Shemitah cycle. And that from in the past, I always take you to the past to the future. It's a double prophecy, okay? It's a paradigm that I've shown you, and how the past kingdoms show us what's coming, and that there's a dual prophecy from past to future that's going to replay itself out. Now, I've shown you that paradigm. You can go look at that video. It's a fairly long video, but it's worth a watch because I think it gives you all the information you need to understand. But if we look at these dates, and let's say in the past, when the second temple was destroyed, we started to see the removal of the Jewish power, or you know, they were taken over, and their city was in run, and their temple was destroyed, and so they fell from power. And a year later, we saw that Babylonian rise. Okay. As this temple was destroyed, we saw this rise of the Babylonian a year later. And so I think it's extremely important that when I looked at this section in here, I saw something extremely important. I believe that it's going to be a potential time we need to watch. And I don't know for sure this is going to happen. This is just my opinion, speculation, but it's something I think we should be aware of. And it would fall in line with how my timeline is set up and the time frame that it has to happen. So I've indicated, I'm sorry about my cough. I've indicated that Daniel 8 would occur first, that Iran would fall once the Kurdish would align with them or join with Iran. We would see Turkey crush them. And then once we saw that destruction of Iran, they would be absorbed into the new Ottoman Empire. And from that, we would see them drive across the Middle East to Egypt, get stopped there. Remember, Jeremiah puts the stones in the ground and he can't go any further. And then he's drawn back into Israel, sits between the two seas, and then attacks Israel, I've said, by October of 23. So if that's the case, and my timeline's right, which I don't know if it is, this is something I'm watching intensely to see whether Daniel 8 is really going to happen here in the next year or so. But if Daniel 8 is going to happen, we're going to see the destruction of Iran. I would say that this time in this area is the time that I would actually really be concerned about, because we have the fall equinox, or the start of the death cycle. We have the Feast of Trumpets beginning, the end of the sabbatical year, which started here, which is the removal of the Jewish power and the rise of the Ottoman, or back in the past, the Babylonian Empire. And that from this we would see a destruction of a country called Iran, which will geopolitically change the world. And this would give then the rise to the new Ottoman Empire, and give this white horseman Erdogan, or Gog of Ezekiel 38-39, his crown. And then he would start to move towards Israel as he's driving through the Middle East toward Egypt. And with him, as Joel 1 tells us, we would start to see a locust event, or plagues affecting Israel, to the point that a third of the population would be affected and potentially perish from this. And then by October 10th of 23, we would see Gog of Ezekiel actually attacking Jerusalem, not completely breaking in the walls, but attacking and sieging them, and that 15 days later we would see them die through the sixth seal event and the wrath of the Lamb. So I am concerned about this September equinox area here, and that I could easily see, as Erdogan is getting ready to invade in the next month or so, few weeks, days, into Syria and Iraq, starts to drive these Kurds down and pull them between Baghdad and Shusha-Iran. And when that happens, we're going to see the destruction of them, as Daniel 8:1-10 tells us. This country, these people, will be absorbed into the new Ottoman Empire that Erdogan wants to rebuild by 23, and that they would drive through the Middle East, end up in Egypt, and by October of 23, we would see a siege on Israel itself. Israel would be attacked. Jerusalem would be under siege itself. The walls won't be destroyed, because it tells us in the paradigm they won't break through the walls for 2 years. And that will be the residue of what is left from the destruction of Gog of Ezekiel 38-39 on the sixth seal event. Okay. And then from that we would see those burials, the weapons burnt for 7 years, and starting the seventh seal event of the half an hour of silence, the 144,000 selected. The winds are being held back until the sixth trumpet, which happens when Antichrist rises here. And then they're released. And we would see an Antichrist figure spring up around the spring of 2024. He would stop the continual burnt offerings, and shortly after that, he would sign the covenant of death with the nations, and we would start the 1260 days into tribulation. I hope I'm wrong, but I believe September is going to be an extremely important month as we move forward into the Feast of Trumpets and the end of that sabbatical year of 2022. So keep your eye on these dates here, because I believe this is extremely, extremely important. And it's amazing how the Feast of Trumpets wrap around these dates I had already given you. Because I had given you the fall equinox, and I had given you the end of the sabbatical year, and I had given you the potential rise of the Ottoman Empire here. But I had not realized, because there's just so much going on here, that the Feast of Trumpets begins and ends in the middle of all this, and that by the spring of 23, we could potentially see major plagues and disease from COVID or a variant of COVID attacking Israel to the point a third of their population will die prior to Gog of Ezekiel 38-39 attacking him, or Erdogan sieging this country, and a third of them dying through that attack, so that the third can be removed to the hidden place before Antichrist comes up on the sixth trumpet. So God bless you, everybody. Keep an eye. 2022 is going to be a radical year. There's a lot going on out here. We're watching the markets scream right now. They're just about ready to break. Fed's raising rates 4 or 5 times this year. The taper has been sped up 2 or 3 times faster than they originally thought, and they're going to start raising rates faster and faster as they realize inflation and other issues, supply chain breakdowns, and other things are happening out here to the point they can't control any of this. And we're starting to see even the warehouse workers coming down with massive COVID spikes, and so they can't even get supplies out to the shelves, and so we're going to start to see a lot of supply shortages and things like that in the near future. And probably another massive spike of COVID in the next 4 weeks or so. Because if you think about it, you've had a lot of opening ups of different events in the last few months. You've had the schools open up in the fall. You had a Thanksgiving, which spiked during Christmas. You have a Christmas and a New Year's, which are going to spike at the end of this month. And then you still have the last, usually you get a last wave of flu around February and March. So we're not through this, and then another variant's going to come out. So we need to really, really watch how this is all playing out. But I believe September of this year, things are really going to start to spiral down extremely hard. And then once Iran falls at the end of this year, that will geopolitically change everything. Even fuel prices and other things are going to start to have some real massive problems. They're already talking about oil over $100 and how that's going to affect our economies as we move forward. So God bless everybody. Be safe out there. Get right with God. Find the open door, and that's Jesus. He's the only way to heaven. He's the only way to the Creator. Be safe. God bless.